Chapter 7, The Wish. "This is highly irregular," said Agnes. "Does that mean you won't do it?" said Neriah, trying not to sound too hopeful, "or that you can't?" Her headache was back, her brain corrugated with and seamed as a walnut pressed between the two halves of her skull. "She'll have to do it," said Caddy. "It's her obligation." "It is," said Agnes, in what seemed to be agreement, but there was a weary rise to her voice that suggested a question rather than a comment. Neriah glanced from Agnes to the pillar as though for a long association with Agnes it might know the true meaning of her statement, but the pillar just looked back at Neriah with its hollow stony eyes, and she finally turned away. The sun on this Christmas Eve day was mottled smear that hung into the sky like a bruise. Neriah's thoughts took odd turns, getting lost in dark passages and corners, and her mouth tasted sour as though she was a mirror of this jaundiced, brooding afternoon. "We shall have to alter the rules for this wish," said Agnes. Neriah pressed an index finger to each temple. Maybe she should feel her brain pounding through the fragile tissue of her skin. "A wish made by one person for another must run by different laws than a wish made on behalf of the wisher alone." Agnes folded her hands into her lap and muttered a bit. "A coin for passage. Yes, one coin will do well enough. There is only one wish after all." She looked at the well, then nodded as though it had sent her some sort of secret message. "One cycle of the moon. Ah, here we come to it." Agnes raised her eyebrows and spoke directly to Neriah. "Should you repent of this wish and want to take it back, both you and Catty will have to revoke it together. It is, after all, a wish that involves the two of you." "Oh, we'll never take it back," promised Catty, reminding Neriah of her own boast to Agnes just last week. "I'd be careful how I said it," she said, pointing to the pillar. "I wouldn't need to take it back, not like him." Neriah looked at the pillar now, and it met her gaze with the same secret stony face. Agnes shrugged. "Many have said the same. Now show me your coin." Neriah wrapped her fingers around the three cold metal discs in her pocket. "Does it hurt to make a wish?" "That depends on the wish," said Agnes. "Vastly comforting," said Neriah, opening her hand. "And here, ladies and gentlemen, we have a choice of copper, nickel, and silver." "Silver, perhaps," said Agnes, but she seemed to be looking past the coins, not at them, as though she might be reading another fortune in Neriah's palm, following her lifeline and finding it short. Neriah closed her fingers and raised the coins to toss in. She had no desire to watch the coin fall, no stomach to see the birds suspended between life and death, the roses encased in their tissues of ice, and the hummingbirds' eggs. Neriah couldn't bear to think of those eggs. She looked behind her to record the scene on her memory, painting a picture of the day she made her wish. Catty sat on the sled behind Neriah, and Osa lay by the pillar, licking her paws, trying to melt bits of sharp, granular snow lodged between the pads. Neriah opened her fingers and let the coin fall. Everything was frozen still. Neriah waited for the sound of metal striking water. It was so quiet she half expected to hear the heartbeat of a hummingbird. "Agnes has it," said Catty sharply. "It has not been found acceptable," said Agnes, holding the coin between her thumb and forefinger, pecking it through the air in silent message for Neriah to take it back. Neriah slipped it inside her mitten, warming it up between the crusts of wool and flesh. She was secretly happy that the well had more commonplace taste than she had supposed, and wondered whether she should offer her nickel piece when a copper one might do so well. But she'd already offered both coins and didn't dare back out now. She held out the nickel. "I think not," said Agnes. "I see now. It must be Catty who gives the coin." "Gimme one of them," said Catty, reaching toward Neriah and waving her finger. Her talkative hands had been very quiet until now. "I didn't bring anything with me." "You must have brought it," said Agnes. "It need not be yours, but it must be precious to you." "But I don't have anything," began Catty, patting at her pockets to show they were empty. But then her expression changed, or rather her expression vanished, leaving her stony and secret as the pillar. "I did bring something," she said, "just in case we might need it." She thrust out a hand and crossed with gold, and Neriah had to step forward to see what it was. And there, on Catty's palm, lay a row of garnets set in gold. "My mother's ring," said Neriah. "I don't want to throw that in the well. Here, give it back." Caddy closed her fingers and round the ring. I didn't take it to throw into the well, she said. I would never do that. I thought of hanging it next to my mother's jewels in the Brumerium because it's our secret treasure place. But it's not made of paste, said Neriah, who was secretly rather cross that she hadn't thought of this herself. The Lord High Chancellor will take it under advisement. What else do you have in your pocket? But it was on her finger that Caddy finally found the coin. Both she and Neriah saw it at the same instant. Your pink rose ring, said Neriah. But my papa gave it to me, said Caddy. That's a whiny voice, the AV would say, said Neriah. Caddy looked at the ring for a long time and then drew it off her finger. When Neriah tossed the coin into the well, she waited only a moment before her listening ear heard it greet the water with a faint sigh. It has been found acceptable, said Agnes. You may now make your wish. Now that the moment had arrived, Neriah found her walnut brain could not produce the wishing words that had come so easily to her in earlier careless days. But everyone was waiting for Agnes. Agnes was waiting. Caddy was waiting. The well was waiting. It had already eaten Caddy's ring and was very likely growing hungry for its second course. I wish, said Neriah, licking her lips, which froze and cracked in the cold air. She whipped her mouth and her sleeve, but that only made it worse. I wish, she said again, that Caddy had a body just like mine. She heard her voice turn high and strange, and in the same moment a sudden mist dropped from nowhere and swirled about her as though it were being stirred with a spoon. It thickened with each rotation on the cloud that reminded Neriah of a gigantic marble, all swirls of gray and copper with a twist of gold at the eye. Neriah found herself standing in the eye of the marble, skewered by its hot gold glare, and after a moment she felt an instant tug and then a sudden whoosh that sucked her painlessly away. She thought that she was floating off from her body, and even as this impression formed, the golden eye began to dim and draw it on itself. As that happened, Neriah's headache disappeared so completely that only its absence reminded her of its former presence. She'd all but forgotten about her pounding walnut brain. Her legs turned numb, and she grimaced, thinking of the pins and the needles to come. Gradually, through the thinning smoke, the real world appeared, and there came the sound of Osa, whining with unusual urgency. Neriah looked over her shoulder at Caddy, but found she looked the wrong way. She found herself staring at the edge of the common, and this made her think that the wish had plucked her up and transported her a few yards for some explicable magical purpose. Where were Caddy and the sled? She swept the common with her gaze, startled to see that the ground was very much closer than it should have been. Osa stood on 4 tense legs beside the pillar, which looked rather as if it were sneering, and then slowly, her heart filled with misgivings she could not name, Neriah looked toward the well. A girl leaned against the granite wall. She was rubbing all her temples through the mist of coppery curls. Neriah noted critically that there was a stain on her shabby gray coat, and for a moment, just a moment, the girl's name fluttered on Neriah's tongue. She felt as though she'd known the girl all her life, but she couldn't think of her name. Oh, I have a terrible headache, said the girl in the clear, ringing voice, as though she might sing beautifully. Osa looked at the girl and then slunk away, peering around as though she were searching for somebody. And then Neriah knew where she'd seen that girl. She'd seen her reflection in the gold-framed mirror over Winter's mantel, seen her distorted by the copper pot in the AV's kitchen. Neriah, she said. Neriah Magdalena? Neriah looked down and saw what she already knew she'd see. She examined her body bit by bit as though they were a patchwork girl piecing herself together from old scraps and tatters. She couldn't bear to discover the whole truth at once. The garnet ring fit loosely on her middle finger. Her hands were lying on a bed of white wool. Neriah let her eyes trail down the wool to its band of ermine, and then still further to the smooth, bright button boots, shiny as the day of their purchase. They'd never been used for walking, and they lay limp, odd angles to the sled. An expanse of hardened, crusty snow spread all around the sled. Beyond the common lay the village, the world, the sky. The common receded to nothing more than a hard, glittering speck, and gravity granted to Neriah a special dispensation from its heavy rule. She drew away for her body to float out above the common, watching the 2 girls below with nothing more than detached interest. She saw the pillar's craggy skull, the fringed shawl Agnes wore about her head. She saw Osa creep toward the sled with her tail between her legs, her ears tilted forward into curved question marks. Osa pushed at the dark-haired girl's face with her nose and then heaved the upper body onto the lap of the sled, where she lay with her paws dangling over the other side. It was Osa's familiar doggy smell, which had seemed to Neriah like very, very good fried potatoes, that tugged Naraya gradually toward the ground. She might have been a balloon, her life's air leaking through a small but fatal wound, and at the same time, the true horror of her situation rushed over her in a sickening wave, and she grunted as if she'd received a blow to the stomach. She was obligated to sit very still to recover her breath. "Caddy," she said finally, "we have to revoke the wish." But the copper-haired girl was examining the sole of her shoe. It was imprinted with a pattern of scuffs and scrapes that documented Naraya's particular way of moving through the world, unique as its fingerprint. "I can walk," said Caddy slowly, as if she just realized that she could now control those legs, change their pattern, and make it her own. "I take it back." Naraya tried to cry out, but she'd pitched her new voice too high and had to start again. "Tell me, Agnes, tell me about taking back the wish." "You wouldn't want to do that, would you?" said Agnes. "Not now that you've made the well so happy. It got the wish it was waiting for, you know, and now it can start to melt. Those eggs you talk about so much may even have a chance." "Tell me!" shouted Naraya. "One cycle of the moon to repent and call it back." "Yes, but how could I say I take my wish back about Caddy?" "You may use any words that express an intent to take it back," said Agnes, "and you need not actually be at the well to do so, but Caddy must be present with you, and of course she must revoke it too." "What about that?" said Naraya. "Do we have to take it back exactly the same way?" "If," said Agnes, "without one cycle of the moon." "Never mind the moons," said Naraya sharply. "What if we said it at the same minute?" Agnes looked at the well again with the same intent, questioning gaze. "A minute will do fine." "But I got my wish," said Caddy. "Look at me now." She dashed madly, crunching through the crusty snow, breaking Naraya's boots of old habits and training them into new ones. Osa surged forward as though she might leap up and herd Caddy into some kind of order, but then she hesitated and her chest sunk back into Naraya's lap. Together they watched Caddy run. But who was really running? It was Caddy who decided to plunge across the common to the embankment, but it was Naraya's muscles that took her there. "Don't leave me!" cried Naraya. Caddy turned around, but she kept dancing in place. "Tell Wilkes to put the sled under the back porch. I'll be along to fetch it." "It's my sled," said Naraya. "I just let you ride on it." But if Caddy heard, she did not reply, and Naraya's boots took her up the embankment and out of sight. Long moments passed. "You can't feel anything in a dream," said Naraya, and pinched herself. There was no pain, just blessed nothingness. She bit her wrist and then jumped. "Oh!" she said slowly, then struck at her legs savagely. She'd never realized Caddy had no feelings in her legs. "Who am I?" she said presently, looking at her hand. It was Caddy's hand, but its trembling came from Naraya alone, and the ring with its flash of garnets belonged to Naraya too. "I am Naraya, Naraya Magdalena. I have memories. I live with the Abbey. I remember skating. I remember singing." Caddy may have taken her voice, but at least Naraya had the memory of singing. Caddy didn't know the hundreds, maybe thousands of songs that Naraya knew. Caddy didn't know all 12 verses of Darling Johnny. And it's "Where have you gone to, my Johnny, my darling? Where's your spirit gone roaming, my darling, my ain? They say that the maid from the city has bewitched you. How I wish you'd return to your old self again." She wore Caddy's skin, but she was not Caddy. "I am Naraya," she said out loud. "The Abbey loves me. I love the Abbey. He sings. Tonight there'll be no singing with the Abbey, though." She couldn't bear that thought, and she willed her mind to float away from her body again, but it stayed obstinately with the rest of her, which was bound into Caddy's muscles, stitched firmly into her skin. "I can play the describing game so that the Abbey nods and says, 'Yes, yes.' I can tell him about the sky on the day I made my wish. I can tell him it was a smoky opal lit from inside by sparks of red and green and blue." She stared into the iridescent sky, and as afternoon trembled between day and dusk, the sky dimmed and the opal lights went out.